And so I wanted to ask you, have you reached out to the Solar Energy Industry Association? And if so, what have they said? Because I know here in California, I've been having deep discussions with them because we're doing a couple solar pilot projects here in California. CPSC is with state funding. And what I've been told by the representative here in California for SEIA is that they are absolutely starting to embrace reuse. And they get it too. It competes with their members. It competes with new sales, but they realize that in order to really look like a green organization that they are supposed to as solar energy, they need to not do exactly what you're saying they're doing, which is just shred these things so they can put new ones on. So, have you heard anything from them?
About 4 years ago, they came out with a draft policy that there was an effort for all of the solar manufacturers to come out with a draft policy, and somebody sent it to me for my comments, and it was definitely shred. You know, that the first owner is the last owner. And I submitted a few pages of comments to them saying that's the same mistake that the cell phone companies and computer manufacturers made 20 years ago. Because in fact, the people that, if you punch these into a new market, you're actually developing those markets. If not, but for the flip phone, Africans would not be papered with cell phone towers today. You know, so that the second owner that they need to see it, as long as it's going into a new market that they're not in yet, that's actually market development for them. And it's dollar foolish to think that the American resale market is their enemy. You know.
Hi, folks. Your facilitators arrived. Thanks for carrying things, Robin. I was stuck in building materials. We had a little technical issues. So I came in the middle of a good conversation. So sorry to interrupt. Let's just go around the room and have everybody introduce themselves, unless you've already done that.
No, we've not. Sorry.
No. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to call people out as you appear on my screen. So my name is Brooke Nash. I'm the branch chief for municipal waste reduction at MassDEP in Boston. I've been working with cities and towns there for about 25 years, and sort of when Robin Ingenthron left MassDEP in, what was it, 2002, I kind of inherited the electronics recycling work, and so I know a fair amount of electronics recycling. Everything I know about reuse and repair I've learned from Robin, actually, as I've been following his career. So anyway, it's a topic that I'm passionate about. I read a great book called Secondhand by Adam Minter, where I learned even more about how electronics do need to find their way to markets outside the US. So anyway, I'm excited to learn from other folks on the call today. So let's see, let's go with Christy Berry. Remember to unmute.
Yep. Hi, good morning. I'm Christy Berry. I'm from the Center for Ecotechnology, and as many of you know, we administer the Recycling Works in Massachusetts program on behalf of the DEP. So I'm here to hear what's going on with folks and be a representative of this program for our no-cost waste assistance for businesses. For myself personally, I also am interested in electronics recycling, especially appliances and small appliances that I think people tend to throw away quite often rather than and get a new cheap one rather than try to figure out how to fix. So Peter, I see you're here from the Fix It Clinic, and that's for me personally, like I said, that's sort of where my excitement is about this, is sort of smaller consumer-based reuse and repair.
Thank you. Okay, Doug Kobold.
There we go. Thank you, Brooke. Yeah, so I'm Doug Koval. I'm the executive director for the California Product Stewardship Council. Been doing this job for about 2 years. CPSC is all about extended producer responsibility and product stewardship. I love this field. I was actually the chair of the board before becoming the executive director, and I've been talking trash for about 28 years. I've covered just about every type of trash or hazardous waste you can think of. So I enjoy being able to get involved in these types of subjects. I could have easily gone over to textiles as well, because we're doing some pilot studies on textiles as well, and how to get those diverted and reused rather than just shredded or sent to foreign countries for downsize and downgrading. So excited to be here. Love to hear this group, and I will add more as it comes in.
Thank you. All right, Gail.
Hi, I'm Gail Bernard from the Danvers Department of Public Works. I've been working here for about 10 years, and right now we're having an issue with our electronics recycler. They have gone out of business, so looking for other vendors and more opportunities to recycle electronics.
Thank you. All right, Robin Ingenthron. You're muted.
Yeah, I got out ahead and I introduced myself and told everybody about the Rentham situation as being the same idiocy that we've seen
Okay,
over the years.
the solar panels, yes.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Okay, wasn't with you there for a sec. Okay, thank you, Robin. Peter?
Hi, I'm Peter Mulia, Fix-It Clinic, and although I live in Berkeley, California now, where it is 7:30 in the morning, I did live in Central Square in Cambridge for years and years. So it's sort of like a second home, and I'm the one who dragged Doug Kobold here at this ungodly hour. So I'm sorry, Doug, but thanks for being part of it.
All right, Ken Stone.
Yeah, hi. I'm on the advisory board of Plymouth, Sustainable Plymouth down here in Plymouth, Mass. I also have been involved in writing a number of bylaws and health regulations, primarily around plastics reduction. And we're looking for new things to do. And electronics seems to be a real issue in terms of what to do with those other than to take them to the dump. So.
Thank you, Ken. Kathy?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Kathy Dudnoff. I work with MassDEP as an environmental analyst, and I'm still kind of new to the job, so I'm really learning about the reduce and reuse aspect. So I'm very excited to hear what all of you have to say about electronics, because I'm just going to take it all in and hopefully learn a little more today. So thank you.
And Kathy's our note taker too, so thank you, Kathy.
Yep.
All right, Alex.
Yeah, hi, Alex DeBellis. I'm an associate with the Right to Repair campaign. I also recently started in my position, but I'm based in Boston right now, currently living in Somerville. But yeah, I'm excited to hear everyone's input about electronics, and I'm also excited to contribute to the conversation.
Thank you. Ray? Remember to unmute.
See if it'll work. Okay, yes, my name is Ray Fow, and I'm a member of the Bolton Local, which is the sustainability group in Bolton, and also the Rotary Club. And I've been involved with repair cafes since 2013 when we started ours here. And then since then, we've continued up until things have slowed down quite a bit because of COVID, but I also have helped quite a few other towns get started doing repair cafes as well. And as far as electronics, we try, if we can, to have people repair their item and keep it. But if they can't, then we look for opportunities. And there is an issue where it seems like the recycling companies are just not making it and are going out of business. So we need to find more opportunities for ways we can take care of things that are no longer usable or repairable.
Thanks, Ray. Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Kay. I used to live in and around Boston, Somerville, Central Square, all those places. But now I live in New Hampshire, and I'm starting a library of things in New Hampshire. And so I came upon the Mass Working Group that way. And there's so many great things happening in Massachusetts. And I'm just like soaking it all in, all this information. I definitely want to have something like the Recyclopedia that you guys have. And so I'm learning about these kinds of things like electronics I know nothing about.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us. Okay, Neil.
Hi, Neil Ryan here with Keep Massachusetts Beautiful. So we're a nonprofit working to clean up and green up the state of Massachusetts. So just hoping to share whatever we learn through these sessions with people of Massachusetts.
All right, and last but not least, Michaela.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, sorry, I'm kind of half listening in while still answering some calls and stuff. But yeah, I'm the waste reduction coordinator for the city of Salem, and yeah, I'm hoping to learn more about proper disposal of electronics to share with the city.
All right, thank you. Okay, well, this we've got a great group here. I'm really excited to dive into this. You know, I think when we talk about electronics, so certainly the recycling industry has come a long ways in the last 20 years, and 25 states have. Oh, we have somebody who's just joined us, actually, Carrie. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. So hi, I'm Carrie Sheehan. I'm the US policy lead for iFixit. iFixit is an international organization that hosts hosts and produce open source repair guides and manuals. And we're like the Wikipedia for repair manuals. And we also supply spare parts and tools. And our goal is to kind of help teach the world to fix, essentially.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited to see that the repair and fix-it sector is well represented on this call, because I think that's one of the critical things that I'm hoping we'll talk about or cover and figure out how we can advance that. I'm starting to say that, you know, recycling of electronics is we have a decent infrastructure in the US. 25 states have extended producer responsibility take-back laws for electronics. Massachusetts actually is not one of them, but the recycling industry has certainly had its challenges. I think, you know, the goal of this group is to look upstream and look at how we can repair electronics, reuse electronics that maybe don't even need repair and can be passed along to others that need them. And so I want to get into, you know, how we can do that through policy, through, you know, dare I say, legislation, which is in Massachusetts is surprisingly challenging to tackle. Our legislature doesn't do waste and recycling legislation, I like to say. They're good on energy stuff, but we have not cracked that nut on recycling and waste prevention, but never say never. So anyway, I'm going to just sort of open it up and say, where do we want to start? I mean, we've talked about right to repair in the past. I know there was a bill pending in Massachusetts. I don't know the status of that. Would love to hear if anybody wants to share this on the status of that. And let's just start the conversation.
So I can talk a little bit about the bill in Massachusetts. So iFixit and the Repair Association have supported right to repair legislation in 25 states last year, and one of them was Massachusetts. And our sponsor for that bill was Senator Feeney, and he is interested in reintroducing that bill again this year. And that's a broad right to repair bill covering all digital electronic equipment. We're very excited about this in Mass. We think it's a great time. We think that the ballot question on car telematics repair, question 1, laid a lot, the campaigns around that laid a lot of the groundwork that we feel like will help us kind of move this bill over the finish line, because they essentially spent $20,000 educating people about our issue. So that we find that pretty helpful. And so our plan is, again, reintroduce that bill with Senator Feeney. And it would, what I think would be most helpful is if we have a kind of ground campaign to support people calling their reps, and especially Representative Taki Chan to encourage them to pass this bill.
So did it reset? Does it have to go through the entire process again, through the committee process and everything all over?
I believe so.
So we have a 2-year legislative session in Massachusetts, and I believe so we're just ending a legislative session, which means that, yes, it basically is like a reset. Every bill gets reintroduced, usually in January. My experience, and Rob might be able to chime in. I mean, we've had an e-waste bill introduced every session for the last, 20 years. And so if it's been in the session before, it does tend to move, fairly quickly, at least out of committee. But, it's getting it over the finish line that's that's always been the challenge. But yeah, it was exciting to see. We had a ballot referendum about the automotive right to repair, and it won handily. So I was, in spite of all of the scare campaigns that the industry was running. So that was good.
So Brooke, before you joined, we were having an animated discussion about solar panels.
Yeah.
As one topic. And I just want to add to that I agree that upstream, so solar panels are really hard to recycle because there's too much glass for the e-waste people and there's too much e-waste for the glass people, among other issues. And I would like to challenge, given Massachusetts has such an academic credential with all those great universities there, and so many, and produces so many engineering graduates, can we start to look at how to move upstream and think about how we go to manufacturers and say, you have to redesign these things so that they can be properly recycled at end of life. Robin, I'll shut up there.
Well, this is a reuse focus group, and some of you, like Ken and Ray and Doug and me, are old enough to remember the Monty Python movie, "I'm not dead yet." What I would suggest that you might focus on is procurement. Again, those of us old enough to be in the next Expendables movie also remember the procurement effect of recycled paper content. And that's usually been used to think of just for very ordinary things like paper. But at the point when the state is purchasing $1 million of solar panels or phones, if there's a little line of text in that RFP saying you will not knowingly shred safe working equipment at the end of its life, and you will allow the state to sell it surplus property for value to people who know how to use it, that just starting to get in with the procurement offices would be my suggestion. I don't know if Eric Friedman is still over there.
I'm all with you about the procurement thing. The challenge there becomes, what we're observing is that there's this race to the bottom in terms of durability, that because we really want to just basically get it out at the cheapest costs, because we just are not paying the full cost of the item when we acquire it, we just look for the lowest cost possible. And so the panels that are coming out of China and India now are not as durable as a 20-year-old panel that came out of Korea or Japan. And so, the first time a hailstorm comes or a contractor steps on the corner the wrong way, and that thing is done. Even though, so there's some way, we need some other way of vetting what is the true quality and long-term durability of, so everything, not just the solar panels, but we're talking about solar panels at the moment.
Peter, I'd like to add on to that. So California is going to be part of the problem, believe it or not. Well, we're trying to solve the solar panel reuse and recycling problem ourselves by introducing solar on every new rooftop, starting beginning of this year we're still in. We're concerned that there's now going to be exactly what Peter said, which is going to be these inferior panels that are made. We call them builder grade. So instead of that nice 20, 25, 30-year panel that you get normally, you're going to get these 5-year, maybe 10-year max panels, and we're going to see a lot of more rotation because it's the cheap one. Now, if you want a better, higher quality system, you're going to pay for that as a premium upgrade type of situation with new home construction. So we're looking at that as well. How do we prevent that? The solar industry is saying, oh, well, there's not a lot of that out there. They know it's out there because they've admitted that it's out there. They say it's not prevalent, but with solar growing more and more in California pushing so hard, we're going to see that inferior panel construction boost significantly. And so we're trying to work on that, but it would be helpful to have other states joining in on the same task.
Separate from the procurement question, which seems very valuable, so I don't want to distract too much from that, but France just released its repairability scoring index this month, which assigns a score to products based on how repairable they are. And that's also, the European Commission has also referred that to the European Parliament to consider a EU-wide regulation that would require obvious labeling of products with a repairability score. So providing consumers that information at point of sale, which studies show has been really helpful in terms of how it influences purchasing decisions. And that will, we believe, trickle up to manufacturers changing product design in order to be more competitive in the market. And we're hoping that we see some results of that over here as well.
Wow, that's fantastic. I think I had read something about France's legislation, didn't know where it was. So it's sort of the equivalent of like the Energy Star rating here in terms of energy consumption. That is super exciting. Wow, there's, the solar panel thing is kind of mind blowing. What you're saying about how the quality is such an issue and is going to contribute to another tidal wave of materials. I want to go back to procurement for a minute because I do think, and I actually invited somebody from our procurement office. We have a pretty robust environmental preferable purchasing and sustainable purchasing office in Massachusetts. I invited the director, Julia Wolf, who used to work at DEP. She was not able to attend today, but she is in the loop on this, and I talk to her pretty regularly. So Robin brought up, putting the clause in that says you can't shred. I mean, that could pertain to solar panels. I'm also curious how that could be, how we could bring computers into it. I know at one point the state of Massachusetts was leasing its computers for state employees, and there's something like, I think, 60,000 state employees. I know right now they're in the process of switching out in my building our big old clunky desktop computers for laptops. This is a move towards finally acknowledging that teleworking is here 9 months into the pandemic. So people that are still operating on Windows 7, yes, Windows 7, are getting a laptop and a docking station. And in fact, Kathy got hers last week. But I don't know if those are being leased or not. And my understanding is there's some advantages in leasing, and that then the state is not stuck with managing that material at the end of its life. Although if that lease agreement doesn't say, you've got to recycle or reuse it, then we could close that loop. But anyway, I'm interested to hear, does anybody know of models where state procurement offices have required reuse of electronics? The surplus property office one is a good one, Robin. So thank you for that. We do have a surplus property office, but I want to open that up and get some thoughts on that.
Not yet, but I'm talking to Alameda County General Services Agency about adding language when they adopt that stuff. So I put some sort of overview stuff that in the chat already, but just this sense of, I am talking to the Pacifica School District superintendent. She's got to buy 1,000 Chromebooks, and I'm trying to basically convince her that she should at least start to introduce language into her RFPs and RFQs about asking for durability, especially with something like that. So the city of Oakland was experimenting with this idea that, they have thousands of Chromebooks and they're all the same. And they started a program with the high schoolers where they were basically doing this kind of Franken Chromebook thing, where if one had a bad screen and one had a bad battery, they would put those together to make another working Chromebook. But I don't know how far they've gone with that at this point. Another challenge here as we go forward is that as things become more a combination of hardware and software, even if you can fix it mechanically, it can still be obsoleted because, for example, Google at this point is now saying, well, the Chromebooks, we're only going to provide updates for them until the year 2024 or whatever. And so that basically means, well, okay, you've got this thing, it works, but you can't really use it in the way that you intended. So that's something we really got to tackle in parallel with just keeping the electronics going.
Wow. Okay.
But we see that with phones now. Okay, so Verizon is taking all the 3G phones off their network. So basically, there's all sorts of electronics like that occurs all the time now, and it's happening more.
Yeah.
Peter's right.
Yeah, that's it's kind of overwhelming.
One thing to consider, we have in California a lemon law called the Song-Beverly Act, which requires manufacturers, if they make an express warranty about the product, to continue to provide parts and service for that product for 7 years after the date of sale or date of manufacture. If the product at wholesale was over $100, if less than $100, it's and over 50, it's 3 years. And so that's something that potentially consider whether Massachusetts might be interested in doing something similar and working in a requirement for extended service and support, including any relevant updates.
Interesting. Yeah, because I know Massachusetts has a lemon law. I assume most states do, but that's okay. So to find that information, Carrie, can I follow up with you?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think and a good example of how that's changed things for California is that most places in the country, Apple only provides service for their phone for like 4 years, I think, a few, not 7 after manufacture, but in California they provide those tools and service for 7 years.
Huh. Okay. So interesting.
I think the only other similar law like this is in Turkey. But I think the California one is a good example.
Carrie's right. Really? That absolutely what it does, Brooks. It shows the manufacturers can do it, and this is one thing that's always higher the bar is set somewhere else. When the manufacturers come back to your legislation and say we can't do this, well then all you have to do is point over to California and say, well, you're doing it in California, why can't you do it here? And we do the same thing in California. Right. We point at the EU and we point at Canada. For the programs they have that are a higher bar than ours, we say, well, wait a minute, you can do it up there. Why can't you do it down in California? So it's always a good ploy to use on them.
Right. And it's parts. They have to provide parts, or is it more than parts?
They have to provide parts and service.
Yeah.
And service. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm not sure how it's been interpreted with regard to software updates. But if it doesn't extend to software updates, that would be a good update for that legislation or a good model for other states.
Does it also allow for a customer or an independent repair shop doing the repair rather than the manufacturer?
No, and that's something we're putting forward in our bills at the bill of Massachusetts. We have one in California last session as well, where we require manufacturers to, or the bill would require manufacturers of products sold in that state to provide access to documentation, including service manuals, instructions, certain kind of software tools, including software tools like tools used to pair parts to main boards, which we're seeing and manufacturers increasingly do, which makes the replacement of parts really difficult, and provide access to spare parts on a fair and reasonable basis. So if they're offering these parts tools documentation to their own authorized service networks, they then have to offer them to independent repair professionals and the owners of the devices on the same terms.
But that's pending, not passed yet.
Not passed yet. No,
Right,
we
okay.
had that.
Just like us, right?
Yeah, and that's the bill that we're reintroducing in Massachusetts this session.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great.
So I added to the chat additional language that I got through Kyle Wiens, the founder of iFixit, from a contact that he has in Texas, who's a lawyer, for working text for how you might introduce into a contract, when you purchase something, the kinds of things we're talking about here.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Okay.
And I can share our model legislation as well. I'll send that to the chat.
That would be wonderful. Kathy, are you able to, if you can capture those in your notes and grab those out of the chat, that would be great. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about barriers. I mean, we did hear some folks having recycling issues, and I know I'm wondering if there's the electronics recyclers. I mean, we've had a lot of them go out of business. They got out over their skis, and everybody thought they were going to make a lot of money in electronics recycling 10 years ago, and it turned out not to be that simple. Robin's been doing a lot of cleaning up of some former electronics recycling businesses in Massachusetts, literally and figuratively. But I'm just curious, I mean, Robin, do you see any possibility of the electronics recyclers in the US starting to incorporate more reuse and repair practices, or is that only going to happen through legislation? I do want to get into the question of EPR laws. 25 states have them, and whether and to what extent that actually precludes reuse. I know a lot about it. I just know that the laws that have been introduced in Massachusetts, every time we look at them, they say reuse is allowed, but it does not count towards a manufacturer's performance standard in the law, meaning they have to recycle a certain amount of stuff, and so they can reuse it, but they don't get any credit for it. And that seems like a big problem. But you might as well say used as it's got electronics that would be demanufactured or shredded to count for towards the performance standards.
I got to work with a lobbyist you might know, Matthew Fisher, when the law was drafted. And we fought, but we got it worked in that reuse could be counted for the manufacturer's goals, so long as it was not sold locally. And we had, that's fair. You don't want to have somebody across the street, bringing in the same, computer and having them, either the manufacturer get credit for it, nor the municipality. The lobbyists later got Karen Knable at A&R convinced that what they meant by locally was the United States of America, so that we could not reuse, despite having it passed through the legislature, and despite me being in the committee when that local language was negotiated. They later said, okay, the definition of local is United States of America. That put us where to effectively get the reuse, we had to open, as some of you know, RetroWorks to Mexico, a women's owned collective in Mexico, which does refurbishing. And we got a bunch of Egyptian partners in Canada. But I would go back to something that Peter mentioned a little while ago about it's not the hardware that prevents reuse. It never is today. That if I've got a perfectly working 1988 CRT television, nobody wants it today. There was an export market for that decades ago. It's usually, Peter mentioned a software update, or it is fear and intimidation from a narrative that I spoke about before. That HIPAA, the myth that people are getting old hospital computers and going into it to harvest data, that's complete fear gobbledygook. Never, ever one case ever happened of data being leaked from a 5-year-old computer. They get it through phishing or through bribery, etc. But anyway, here's what I would say would be great as a concrete step is that when the fear message comes out, like it will for solar, if we don't get in front of it, that Fair Trade Recycling, this organization I work with, we're working with Roe at tradeloop.com. And our concept right now is we'll get to a university, like an MIT or a Harvard, that used to, for years, sell its surplus property. Like I used to work with the surplus property director at Dartmouth before he retired. And they miss the old days when the Chinese immigrant or the second generation person would come in and go through and get their, pay MIT surplus property money for the stuff. And it was this campaign of fear, the bogus 80% of what that guy buys from Massachusetts surplus, MIT surplus property, he's going to burn it. When this comes, it's too late to go back on a lot of that equipment. As I said at the beginning, even if it works, a lot of it nobody wants anymore. But the fear has caused people to hoard. So the surplus property offices are either sending it to somebody that shreds it because they're e-stewards or something. And now the manufacturers are trying to get the same language written into R2, which was originally an alternative to allow for reuse. And we're hoping that if we get a major university to try some of this procurement stuff, that will give battleground testing for then larger state governments and federal government purchase orders. But if you get a really smart bunch of people at MIT who understand the spare tire license, which Brooke might get a chuckle out of. That's when I left. Actually, it was in 2000. By 2001, I was a Cheshire cat in the consulting demotion there. But Microsoft was making it illegal to just type the license back in, to get a new OS on. And that's something that could be written into a government procurement contract. This has to come with 2 licenses, two strings of codes. A second user has to be able to download after we wipe it. Because you've scared us and gotten through the law saying that we must wipe it because African children are reading all of our data. They've already got that HIPAA law passed, so it has to be wiped now. That's too big a lift. But if through procurement, you can get the right for a new consumer to reinstall Chrome or something very easily, then people wouldn't be in this position of requiring it to be shredded, smashing the hard drive so it can't be reloaded, banning it being reused by brown people, etc. We just need a university to take the lead, and then you guys back us up.
Okay, so you're saying, Robin, that that the procurement language should include that what you refer to as a spare tire, that there's 2 software licenses with the piece of equipment, so it ensures there's a second life. Did I get that?
Yeah, so it removes what they wound up doing was driving the business overseas because there's no enforcement by Microsoft of software installation in the emerging markets. And that gave them a huge advantage to people like Ray that are trying to, reuse it locally. Ray, have you solved the operating system problem?
No, we really haven't gotten into that.
There was a bill in Congress back in 2016 called the Your Own Devices Act. I think it was introduced by Representative Farenthold's office. It hasn't been reintroduced. It was supported by the Owners' Rights Initiative and some of the folks in our coalition that would have made it clear that if you own a device that you then own the software within it, and then you can transfer that to another person or resell it. I think that's a good model for some of these things, including like the transferring of licenses for an operating system. I can share that bill again. I'm not sure. I don't think there are plans to reintroduce it, but it's definitely something we could explore.
The transfer of licenses is one issue. The transfer of data, which is what Robin brought up with the HIPAA stuff, is the other issue. Now, my understanding is that in Europe, where they care as much about patient data as we do in the United States, they actually can just scramble the hard drives or the memory using a scrambling algorithm that they actually got from our Department of Defense through their relationship with NATO. So the Europeans are okay with just scrambling it, but here in the United States, the problem is that any phone or laptop that was used in a hospital or a medical research setting where there might be any chance there's patient identifiable data on the hard drive or in the memory, it has to be crushed. It has to be destroyed. And that obviously, the value plummets at that point. So one thing Massachusetts could do, could they be brave enough to, like, your Department of Health basically say, our computers, our secondhand technology, our phones, laptops, and computers, will basically scramble them and indemnify, like it would be very brave of you to do this, but could you take a step and say, basically, for your computers that are, HIPAA, that might have HIPAA data, it's okay to just re-scramble, to scramble them.
I will offer $1,000 right here and now to anyone who can ever find any example of any health data ever taken from legacy equipment.
UCSF had a data breach, and they were really legacy equipment, as opposed to, like, having
all of the data
laptop
theft
stolen.
100% of the cases of data theft ever documented occurred in equipment that's in active use. And it was the HIPAA law was written when I was at MassDEP and researching this. And why is someone from Redmond, Washington, introducing this healthcare legislation? What else is on the hard drive? $600 Microsoft Office. And here's the legislator from Austin, Texas. The whole thing was the scare, it's greed and fear. But anyway, yeah, $1,000, I promise it. If anyone can find me an actual example ever, it's like selling flood insurance to Tibetan monks.
Hey, Peter, quick question. What, and also for Carrie, why is the DoD wiping standard not sufficient? Because that's basically what was just described about what's happening in Europe.
I think, Robin, it's fear. Robin, basically, because they could take a computer hard drive and erase it, and put, even if not on a Microsoft operating system, you could put Linux on it. But the standard I'm seeing in the United States is if it came from a medical setting, a laptop, they got to open it up, pull out the hard drive, crush that, and then they can reuse the rest of the laptop. But obviously, for the labor and stuff and the cost to put another hard drive in, it's not worth it.
You just went on mute, Peter.
Yeah, I was done talking.
Oh, okay.
I don't have anything to add to that. I'm not familiar with that standard, but I can check in on that and get back to you.
Okay. All right, so we've got procurement standards is a big one. We've got and state government will be a great place to start. And it sounds like, Robin, you're trying to get a private university to put their toe on the water on this one as well. If I understood you.
Yeah,
correctly.
And me being the initial sell is tough. I generally have the recycling and surplus property people I work with, but they're risk averse. So if, DEP or others were willing to write letters or take a more public position questioning, this 80% of surplus property is burned by orphans in Africa. Ridiculousness. That just makes it easier in the process to get the university to do the work to prove it, because it's difficult in the beginning. But kind of tell them, assure the people that we're pitching to that they shouldn't be afraid. of HIPAA lawsuits. They shouldn't be afraid of being accused of dumping it on Chinese children. You know, make them feel good about it.
Yeah.
Rob Gogan at Harvard University, who just retired, is a good person on this.
Yeah.
And he had me present to Harvard IT, which includes Harvard Medical School, around these sorts of issues. It hasn't gone anywhere, but that might be a good place where we have a small foot in the door.
Yeah, Rob is on the list.
Yeah.
But it sounds like he retired, so maybe I need a new list.
We, I don't know to what extent, obviously this is it's cat time. I don't know to what extent this is I mean, it's a drop in the bucket of this whole thing, but for food donation, for example, through the recycling works for our food waste work that we do, we have some documents that help reassure people about the legality of food donation and risk. And we have the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act, which says that any food donated in good faith, that the donator is protected from any risk of that. And I wonder if some sort of, it's sort of a sideways way of getting at this issue, at the safety, but some sort of approach similar to that, where we have distinct information on the risks. In there, there's something about that there's been almost never someone having a lawsuit for illness caused by donated food, and similar to this, there's never been an issue of data being obtained from used electronic equipment. So I wonder if that concept is helpful as at least a little bit of a stopgap in the meantime.
That's something that we find really helpful as well with legislative efforts. So we have a number of one-pagers that rebut some of the most common arguments that we see from manufacturers, which are likewise aimed at stirring up fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So we have one addressing cybersecurity risks, arguments about cybersecurity risk, et cetera. And so, yeah, we've found that super, super helpful strategy as well.
Mr. Brooke,
Yeah, very great. That's great.
One thing back on the procurement that you guys might consider, I assume you guys also have a waste hierarchy. We have our waste hierarchy in California, which is reduce, reuse, and it goes down from there. Is there a possibility of within procurement documents requiring that the vendors follow, at the end of life, follow the waste hierarchy, and that there's actually some kind of teeth in it, because it's nice to say, well, you follow that and they'll just ignore reuse and go right down to recycle, like Robin's talking about. So if you can put something in there that actually would have consequences if they don't, and there's a way to verify that they are actually using reuse as that first step before recycling, that might be a way to do it. We're trying to do that in any of our new laws here in California as well, to try and prevent exactly that, because we've got a couple laws in California that don't emphasize reuse. Carpet and mattresses are two of those laws. While mattresses is working well, they still try to avoid the renovators, which is the first reuse of an old mattress. And so we didn't create those laws, but we keep putting the patches on those laws as we can. But that might be something for you to think about in your procurement, is requiring that waste hierarchy following.
That's an excellent suggestion. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Good one. Let's see. What else? So state legislation. So we talked about procurement, policy, state law. And what about the repair? So I guess if right to repair were to pass, I guess that would be a game changer, I'm assuming. I mean, we do have certainly a growing movement in Massachusetts, thanks to people like Ray and Peter, where, and MassDEP is actually incentivizing communities to hold repair cafes, to set up libraries of things so they can loan out stuff, so everybody doesn't have to own that special device, electronic device. So we incentivize that through a carve out in one of our grant programs, our recycling dividends program. So we plan to actually expand that and give more weight to that even. And so we're definitely, that movement is, starting to take off, but we're still, barely scratching the surface. What else else can we do to, I mean, I guess right to repair seems to be the holy grail. Are there other things that we can do to convince, maybe this gets to the culture of reuse, but that like every time, Apple comes out with, the new iPhone, how many of us like run out and ditch our 2-year-old phone? I'm not one of them, but yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm just dreaming.
I mean, I think that's one of the things that's great about the French system is that it can include things like device lifetimes. So that's another great kind of labeling and kind of more communication to consumers about the essential cost of consumerism. But I think there are always going to be people who rush out to buy the first iPhone, but we want to make sure that the iPhone that they get rid of, someone else can use and fix for years following and folks who might not be able to afford the newest model. And that's where the right to repair legislation comes in, is making sure that Apple is providing the service information, the schematics, the software tools that are necessary to keep those phones working longer.
Yeah, and I think another thing is to educate consumers, and maybe that's where, I forget what you called that thing, Carrie, the, that thing, some rating about whether the thing is repairable and so on, that if we can get that in front of consumers and kind of educate them that that's an important feature, rather than just buy the cheapest one, even though it only lasts for 2 or 3 years.
Absolutely. And the studies that were done in Europe showed that when that labeling information was present, people were more likely to purchase the more repairable option. And so, I mean, that's something we would also love to see in the US is mandatory labeling for device lifetimes and repairability. It's not part of our legislation right now, because we're going for the gold with this right to repair legislation. But I think a similar labeling scheme would be helpful in the US. And we're optimistic that manufacturers, once they start complying with the French system and the European system, will be more amenable to starting to complying with that in the US. But we also know that there's a lot of pushback from manufacturers. They don't want to do things voluntarily. They won't do these things unless we require them to do so, usually by law.
Yeah.
That said, if the European stuff is successful, so in Europe, they see different brands than we see. They say Krups and Miele and Philips. In the United States, we see Black & Decker and General Electric and stuff. If over time we can show that their products are more durable than our products, I'm happy to work to have the market decide that for us. That, hopefully, rather than there being this race to the bottom in terms of durability, just getting it as cheap as possible, there'll be a race to the top in terms of durability and quality. And that's part of my hope that absent legislation, the Europeans will make this sort of market differentiation start to occur. The challenge here is that, look, I've been like this forever. Okay, from the onset, Fix a Clinic has been about deploying an ethos of repair throughout the civilization. And the challenge here is that, there's people's declared preferences and people's revealed preferences. And everybody says they want to do the right thing, but the reality is, if this is a $5 toaster and a $50 toaster, I'm going to buy the $5 toaster. And the sad part with that, for a moment, is that we found at this point there's no correlation between price paid and ultimate durability. It's a very, very weak connection at this point. So what do you do? I mean, I'm going for this wholesale change in the consumer mindset vis-a-vis their consumption, but the reality is that we're not paying the true cost of the item when we purchase it. There's all these embodied upstream and downstream costs, and we think it's free to throw it away. So people, I think we're doing a great job people will tell you up and down, of course they care about the environment and everything, but then you watch the behavior and it's different.
I'm wondering, I mentioned something about, incentives and that's for companies, but for consumers as well. And I've heard this talked about with the repair and reuse concept, but some sort of like a bottle deposit for small consumer electronics, that if there's some incentive for the purchaser of a new item, a new toaster, a new coffee maker, whatever price point, there's some incentive for them to return the old one, and then for the suppliers, for the stores that they're buying it from, to have to collect those, like Best Buy does with electronics or whatever. Just some sort of system in place like that.
So just beware what you ask for, because then you may be encouraging product churn, and you don't really want to do that.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add to that, Christy, is be careful of the deposit laws. They are an absolute nightmare. They're really hard to manage. And what we've started to push in California is get away from the deposit law, because we have our CRV program for our bottles and cans. And that thing, like was mentioned earlier, I think in Massachusetts, you guys are introducing a bill every year on electronics. Every year, there's several bills introduced on the bottle bill in California. Every year, it's been modified over 60 times. So what we're pushing is, rather than have something up front that consumers expect their money back, is have a bounty system on the back end, so that it encourages folks to collect these things. And it's kind of becomes a sub economy that they can then live on. And then you can structure the law appropriately to incentivize or even mandate the waste hierarchy of that. So basically you create a stewardship program, an organization who is funded typically by manufacturers. Like Peter says, we are not paying the true cost of the sins we are creating or we're buying at the check stand. And so when we start doing that, we're going to make more educated decisions on what we purchase, because we don't want to pay additional money, because the manufacturers are going to roll that cost into the cost of the product. There's no doubt about it. So, but we don't see it on the front end unless it's in the price, then we'll see it. So if there is a structure in place where the funding comes from the manufacturers, and then the requirements on the manufacturers and the stewardship organization are to require reuse first. One, don't introduce a product into the state. So here's something that Massachusetts can do. You can't introduce a new product into the state unless you have a plan for its end of life use. And we're seeing that more and more. And that gets away from any commerce law violations or anything like that, because you're not picking on just Apple and saying, Apple, you can't introduce it unless you have a plan. Every phone has to have a plan coming into the state on how to get rid of that, and get rid of it appropriately. And then you structure in the back of the law how they have to do that with penalties. And they're not going to do it, like Carrie said, they're not going to do anything unless we make them do it. And they're not going to do it. And even if you pass a law, if there's not penalties in there that hurt them, they're going to ignore it. And so you need to make sure be very careful about how you structure it, but you can create a system where they will have no choice but to create this sub economy for collection of these materials, so they don't end up in the landfill, don't end up in incinerators, and that they are actually being reused first, repaired second, and then recycled third.
Yeah, I think Doug, is absolutely right here. We've seen manufacturers get up to some real shenanigans when they with their own recycling programs. Particularly, I'm going to use Apple as an example because I'm here in Silicon Valley. So, Apple has a perfectly functional old phones, and then they essentially just shred them, burn them. They actually sued a recycling company that they had contracted with in Canada, who those recyclers decided, well, we have perfectly good phones. It's utterly a shame to be shredding them, and kind of resold them on the secondary market, and Apple sued them for violating the terms of their contract, which required them to burn the devices. So
and that
very, very careful crafting on exactly how their recycling program must work is necessary.
So here's an interesting.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Robin.
I was going to, without being too ornery, disagreeable, really caution you guys as a former regulator that the concept of, if you write the right law, that's going to solve a problem. As I told you, even though I was right there, and Vermont's a very small state legislature, and I had my own reps in there, just how they changed the definition of the word local. And having seen California SB 20, Doug, you probably know Jeff Hunt's. I was at MassDEP calling him saying, who put in this language? that you have to destroy the device prior to export. They'd actually written that it could be exported, but only if the CRT was ruined by hitting the cathode ray gun. And he said, it was him or the who is his cohort? I'll think of it. Anyway, said, well, we didn't write it as the regulators. That was introduced in the legislation. And I said, I don't believe that. I don't believe a legislator would use the word cathode ray gun. And so I got a copy of the legislation, showed it to him, said it's not here. Oh, no, he actually wrote me back afterwards and said, you're right. Somebody here internally wrote that, but I didn't write it. And this person didn't write it, but somehow it got in there. So there's two problems with the legislative solution. One is that once you create the law, it can be twisted and turned against the free market. And the free market generally loves reuse. If the free market's choosing not to buy an Edsel that still runs, it's because the Edsel is a gas guzzler. And Europe keeps, having this idea that, oh, if we have the Fairphone, and they spent all this time developing a phone that could always be upgraded. But that's not anticipating the future. What is the most important thing to do is to catch the next HIPAA, the next 80% fake statistic, and not to try to cure everything that's in our attics and closets, to give it another life. Move to Texas is probably the best way to manage it, because there's open season on resale there.
But Robin, you're absolutely right. You have to follow the regulatory path as well. I know with the DEA regulations on pharmaceuticals on take back, there's a clause in there called no inadvertent receipt of materials. That's like at a household hazardous waste facility. That was not in anything until they introduced the regulations as proposed. Someone popped that in there. It had never existed before that. Suddenly this inadvertent word, one word that prevents household hazardous waste facilities from taking pharmaceuticals, because inadvertent means whether you know it or not. Who's going to take anything they don't know about? So that can happen. And so what we've done in the past, we sponsored SB 212 in California, which was the pharmaceutical and sharps take back program that became law in 2018. We specified a lot in that law. That law was a long law. And we specified a lot, so we constrained as much as we possibly could in the legislation how those regulations were going to be written. And then we followed up, and we stayed with CPSC, stayed with that regulation to the very end. It just got introduced into our sent to our Office of Administrative Law for adoption recently. But so it was a 1.5 year long process in the regs process to get that right and make sure. But you're right, you have to follow it all the way through to the end.
New York's legislation put the most e-waste companies out of business, because the regulators who I knew and I advised were saying, oh, the more devices that are covered, the better, the more will get recycled. Oh, and the larger the small business, 100 employees, and we'll put that the state governments are going to be covered by it. But they left the manufacturers a ceiling on their obligation. So I almost so the manufacturers all met their responsibility. It didn't have to buy anything more after May 2012. And everybody was still collecting. I was doing Oyster Bay, Long Island, and we were lucky to get out of it. But that put 3 or 4 of the largest in the United States out of business because they couldn't get paid by the OEMs.
So I would love to talk offline with you, Robin, about what's wrong with New York's law. It occurs to me that, hell might freeze over before this happens, since Massachusetts does not have an e-waste take back law. Maybe we have an opportunity to actually get it right. If we were able to, get all of your brains together to help write in this legislation. I know usually what happens is there's like the Berlin Wall between MassDEP and our state house, which is all a block away. So there's zero communication, and the only time I get to look at something, or we get to look at something, is when basically it's gone to Ways and Means, and maybe the attorney calls and says, let's see what DEP thinks about this. And at that point, it's sort of a done deal. And then we get to look at it. And we have like, you know, a day to get comments back. And really, they're just saying check in a box. They don't really want to know what we think. And so anyway, it's so putting all of that aside, if if I could wave my magic wand and we could actually write an e-waste law and, you know, finally get one passed, maybe we could get it right. And maybe that's something that we should put on our, you know, our wish list. Although I've also heard that, you know, again, I mean, it's got to be really tightly constructed so that it doesn't become one of these just recycle and shred laws. So I don't know, maybe that could be a whole other discussion.
But Brooke, something I've never understood is how much power you have in MassDEP to sort of, you know, given existing legislation to chisel away at things at the edges. So for example, we've made this mistake in California with solar panel adoption, which now is bringing these builder grade panels, as Doug mentioned, into the market that are gonna be crappy. So in Massachusetts, you haven't quite, you know, you're on the beginning of your uptake of solar panels. Could you start to do what Robin proposed, which is this idea of basically saying, you can't bring it into the state, or what Doug proposed, but you can't bring it into the state and install it on a roof unless you have a plan for knowing how to get rid of it at its end of life. And to start to force the question I brought up earlier about how do we redesign how solar panels are manufactured from the get-go so that they are more demanufacturable, recyclable when it
Right.
truly is their end of life.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it was just a ballot question a year or two ago, but in the agricultural world, we had a somewhat similar idea of, and the ballot question passed with flying colors, not letting any meat products into the state that didn't meet certain standards of humane treatment of the livestock. Again, lots of complications about that and lots of challenges with how that would actually be regulated. But the idea was that no Massachusetts suppliers can import anything into the state that doesn't meet these standards. So that precedent is kind of there in that way, at least.
One of the things that we did with our bills last year, we had a bill in Washington that prohibited manufacturers from distributing products in Washington that had glued-in batteries. It's largely a response to the Microsoft's move with the Surface Pro to glue the battery into the product so that it's not replaceable or removable. That was introduced last year in Washington. We're getting some pushback on that this year, some pushback from some legislators who are uncomfortable dictating product design, which I expect is common. But I think I think that's a great idea. Generally, I'd like to try to intervene in the product design stage so that companies are producing things more responsibly. And we're, you know, hopeful that things like the French scoring system or other labeling efforts will help that, but legislation would be great as well.
I think procurement's a better way
I think
to try that.
Yeah, and I think this idea of making an analogy to look a Good Samaritan law or the law, like, you know, that you can't sell meat that doesn't meet certain standards. It's always useful to be able to say, you know, we have other things that look like this, that sound like this. We are not going out into, you know, completely uncharted territory. And we're about to lose our breakout room, but Peter, I think you're right that now is the time to start looking at the solar stuff. How much power DEP has? Well, it's all, I mean, it's a game of political capital and what we want to expend, what our commissioner's office wants to expend their political capital on. But I think our DCAM, which is the Department of Capital Asset Management that oversees state properties, is now bumping up against this, as Robin said, 1,600 failed solar panels at a state hospital.
Working solar panels. They're not failed.
Working solar panels. Okay. I see. So they're not meeting their efficiency. Okay.
No, they're at the end of the warranty period, and so they're turning in the warranty. And the manufacturer said to her, I guess, well, you have to destroy these. And I'm trying to pitch her, no, let's move them to Ghana or Morocco.
Right.
We've got partners, but they're working.
Right. Right. All right, well, we're going to run out of time, but this has been incredibly interesting. I've got a ton of follow-up to do. I really appreciate you all being part of this conversation. Got to work cut out for us. See you later, folks. Thank you.
Wait. They're not kicking us out just yet. Can I just give a bigger vision here that Massachusetts and where I am in Northern California have the potential to implement, which is this idea that all the colleges and universities are introducing design thinking now. So we're holding more and more of our fix-it clinics at colleges and universities to teach the next generation of practitioners how to design for durability, maintainability, serviceability from the get-go. And so imagine that we, in Massachusetts, also imagine there's this new vision of what manufacturing looks like, where it's hyper-local, where it's rather than coming from offshore factories, most things that we consume are actually produced in our local area. And if that happens, and that's just a bunch of other stuff that's coming to fore on that. That creates a whole other opportunities to do interesting and innovative things around this. So I'll shut up now. And we're out of time too, so I took it all. Sorry, guys.